right, as we mentioned before, we have a special guest on our podcast today, and we're excited to welcome Ezra Levine, the CEO of Collectable, which is a fractional investing platform for sports collectibles that launched, I believe, back in September 2020. You know, it's not a surprise with the tremendous growth of the hobby. We've been seeing more record-breaking million-dollar sales of sports cards seemingly every month. But what I love about Collectable is that everyday collectors can now have the opportunity to own a part of some of these iconic sports cards where it was just simply unattainable before. Now, as impressive as what Collectable has been doing in the hobby space, they also put together a one-of-a-kind 3-day event for sports card collectors and investors called the Mint Collective, which is taking place from January 28 to 30 in Las Vegas. Looks like it's going to be an awesome event, and we can't wait to hear more about it from Ezra. So thanks again, Ezra, for coming onto the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to be here. Excited to talk about Collectable, but also about our conference that we're running in January. I think it's going to be a really spectacular event.
Yeah, for sure. Now, but before we get into the Mint Collective, I was hoping that we can talk briefly about Collectable, just to give some context for our listeners on why, to me, it makes perfect sense for you guys to put on an event like the Mint Collective. So as I mentioned in your intro, Collectable is a fractional investing platform for sports cards and collectibles. Is it fair to describe or compare Collectable to an app like Robinhood or Wealthsimple here in Canada, where instead of buying fractional shares of stock, in a similar way, users can buy fractional shares of sports cards like the Michael Jordan 1986 Flair rookie?
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, in some ways, we created the stock market for high-end blue chip sports collectibles. Right? When you think about our model versus the stock market, a lot of it will look very familiar to people. We take companies public. These companies are not, real, companies that have employees and that generate revenue, but they are collectibles, right? So we take a Mickey Mantle 1952 Topps, right, or a Michael Jordan PSA 10. We create a little mini company out of it, and then we sell shares to the public. And we run a traditional, almost exactly like an investment bank does for Facebook going public. We run almost a traditional IPO process. And then, we have a whole, almost exactly like a stock market for sports collectibles. So every day, 9:30 Eastern to 4 o'clock Eastern, same stock market hours that everyone's sort of accustomed to, for the New York Stock Exchange and the NASDAQ. We do that on our platform, Collectable, for blue chip sports collectibles. So yeah, I think it's very fair to say that, through Collectable, you can now trade Jordan and Gretzky and Mantle and sort of the goats of sports, if you will, in the same way you could trade Apple, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. So really, really cool thing for the hobby, really cool thing for collectors and investors. And yeah, I mean, our mission here is really to democratize, very buzzworthy, term, of course, but that's really what we want to do, is democratize the world of blue chip sports collectibles, make the most iconic, the most investment grade, the best opportunities in sports collectibles available to the masses.
Yeah, well, that's pretty cool. Like you mentioned, it's making things a lot more accessible for the everyday collector. So I love that about Collectable. One of the questions I get a lot when I talk about companies like Collectable, mostly from old school collectors, is that where's the fun of investing in a card when you can't physically touch and hold the card itself? So I'm wondering, are you finding that most of the users on Collectable are more investor types, maybe even generally skewing younger, where they see sports cards and collectibles in a different way, maybe like as a legitimate alternative asset class?
Yeah, it's funny. When we first launched Collectable back in September of 2020, we got that question a lot more than we do now. I think, so given the rise of digital collectibles, NFTs, and also, the rise of vaulting, where a lot of people are utilizing third-party vaults where they actually are, their high value items, not physically with them anymore. They're just, sort of in your account on, one of the different vaulting places. That question is getting less and less relevant, honestly. And we're seeing that people, as long as they know that they own it, they can show it off and kind of have that pride of ownership factor.
Yeah.
That sometimes they don't really care if they have it physically or digitally. I mean, obviously some people do. And, for those people, they might not be sort of the core collectible user today, but we are seeing, sort of a widespread adoption of digital in all forms. And, I think that definitely has lent itself nicely to collectible success.
Nice. And you don't have to worry about security, I guess, if you have a big card like that at home.
About security, you don't have to worry about your mother accidentally throwing away your card. You don't have to worry about any of that, right? You know that you're an owner. You don't have to worry about any of the pain points. You don't have to submit it to be graded. You don't have to do any of that. You literally go onto our platform. You click buy shares in whatever increments you want. and it automatically gets populated to your digital portfolio, and you see the values fluctuate, and you can, buy, sell, trade at will, essentially.
Nice. What I like about that too is just bringing more people into the hobby, like who otherwise might have not been a collector or into the hobby at all. So
yeah, I mean, I think that this is a really powerful, thing to kind of really expand the hobby. I mean, there's lots of pain points historically in and around the hobby. Obviously, the hobby is an incredible community, and there's lots of people who love to collect and to invest. But there have been real notable pain points, and I would say one of the biggest barriers to entry at the high end of the industry, right? Obviously, there's lower price points accessible and different types of cards and memorabilia items, but at the high end blue chip investment grade stuff, I would argue the biggest barrier to access is price points, right? I mean, we see it almost every day now in the headlines: $1 million sales here, $1 million sales there,
right.
And it's pricing a lot of people out of the hobby, right? And so you're kind of left with two options now, right? Option one is to just collect what you can afford or invest in what you can afford, but you're kind of pushed lower and lower into the quality spectrum. Or you can maintain or even go up the curve in terms of quality and do it fractionally, right? So really what we think we're solving for is owning the best of the best in whatever price points you can afford. And I think that's a really powerful thing for the hobby. And I think it's a really powerful thing to also educate people. I think we've seen this massive boom over the last year, but we've also seen, in some of the lower, sort of the lower scarce items, a real kind of coming to Jesus moment where these prices are coming down, and people are starting to realize that the best place to be if you want to make money and have a real good store value is at the upper end of the industry, and we're one of the only games in town for that.
Yeah, completely agree. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, is Collectable only open currently to US residents due to financial regulations and such?
Yeah, it is, and we're working really active to kind of solve for that. There's, as you can imagine, we are a regulated company. We've chosen, as sort of a matter of company strategic priority, to embrace regulation. I think we were talking before about barriers to entry and kind of pain points of the hobby. Another big one of that is, unfortunately, this industry has had a lot of bad actors, and there's been a lot of of things that have occurred that have eroded collector and investor confidence. We think that in order to solve for that, you need to provide a much greater sense of legitimacy, a much greater sense of transparency, a much greater sense of regulation. And so we've embraced regulation actively, for that primary reason. The caveat to that, of course, is that when you embrace regulation, you are subject to regulation, and there are securities laws around operating in different countries and different provinces.
Yeah.
What we see is real global demand for our business and for participating in the way we're offering. So we're working very actively with regulators and different sort of parties that are in the ecosystem to facilitate that. And our hope is that we're able to really open up international markets sooner rather than later. We're hoping for at some point in 2022, but it's definitely firmly on a roadmap for sure.
Okay, that's great to hear, because we're a Canadian podcast, but so I know a lot of Canadian collectors are looking for something exactly like this to be able to invest.
We definitely see demand from Canada. I would say it's funny. We had a call earlier this morning with our with our team over here, and we all pinpointed a wish list for countries we want to open up as soon as we can. And Canada was front and center. I think so. Canada's our number one wish. We're prioritizing Canada first and foremost out of all other countries.
Nice.
So again, our hope is that at some point in 2022 we're able to operate in Canada.
That's great to hear. Yeah. Funny enough, most of our listeners, according to our data, are still Americans, so I'm sure they'll find value in this episode too. But all right, let's move on to something I'm excited to hear about. Is this upcoming event in late January, the Mint Collective, as I was saying before. It looks amazing, and the fact that Collectable is at the center of it makes perfect sense to me, as the event is about celebrating the evolution of the hobby. Now, can I ask, how did this come together? Where did the idea formulate, and how did it go from there?
Yeah, sure. So the idea really came about. We actually signed a joint venture with the global sort of entertainment, sports, marketing, and agency prowess, called IMG and Endeavor. IMG and Endeavor has been increasingly active in the collectibles category, and they pinpointed Collectable as one of those companies that's kind of changing the game a little bit, right? That's kind of sort of innovating and and growing the hobby in really exciting, interesting ways. And so we struck up a deal with them where, they're experts in throwing live events. We think we're experts in our market, and we've got, a real network here that we can, sort of curate the event. So, it's been a beautiful relationship in that sense, where they're kind of doing what they're really good at, and we're doing what we're really good at. And, the sort of culmination of that is our event in January. It's going to be a really, really cool event. I mean, the real mission behind it is almost purposefully not to make it about collectible, right? This really is not about collectible. We really want to, expand the hobby. We want to expand, the industry. I always say that more innovation and more change has probably occurred in our hobby over the last 18 months than I would argue over the last 18 years, right? I think, there's a lot of questions, right? There's a lot of meaty topics to be discussed and debated. And we really wanted to kind of put together, a unique weekend that brought some of the best minds and leading figures and, real sort of key industry leaders together to kind of chart a path forward. We want to celebrate the past. The hobby's an amazing place, an amazing community, but we also, don't want to turn a blind side to the fact that there's a lot of change and a lot of uncertainty and a lot of innovation. We really just wanted to kind of throw an event that, grew the pie together, that celebrated the history of it, but also embraced the change and innovation that's to come, and to hopefully do it in a really cooperative and collaborative way. So, it's been a huge labor of love for Collectable and for IMG, but you're gonna, when you're there, it's not gonna feel like a commercial for Collectable, right? This is really, we're trying to bring in a lot of different vendors and partners and companies. Some, and I get this question a lot, you're including this company, but they're competition to you. I'm like, they're not competition. In a sense where, I would rather own, smaller market share in a much, much, much larger industry than be a dominant player in a smaller category.
Good point.
So
good point.
We are absolutely trying to expand the reach of the hobby to kind of make people understand that there's a lot of different participants now, right? There's the collectors and the breakers and the content providers, but there's also investors, right? And people looking at this as an investment. So again, really kind of merging the gap of, passion and profits, right? Investors and collectors. Sure. Everyone has a role there. And so really what the Mint Collective was designed to do was to kind of put on a platform that really kind of merged those two worlds and did it in a very collaborative way.
Yeah, no, that sounds really cool. It's funny how this event is in Vegas too, because Hyung, do you remember one of our previous podcast episodes?
It was like our first one. Yeah. We always said somebody needs to do it in Vegas, and it's going to be innovative, right? And that's what it's all about. And we're saying this back in probably June, July, and I'm glad that we could actually see that come into life, because this is exactly what's needed in the hobby is innovation and change, right? With technology coming, we say this a lot in our podcast. It's creators that like yourself that are creating these future timelines or these solutions to the problem that industries have. And the more people and more leaders that can do it, it's just going to grow the hobby and kind of go to the place that I guess everybody kind of wants the hobby to go to, I guess, right? So
sure.
Yeah. No, I think you're spot on there. Yeah, I mean, look, I think Vegas definitely adds a little bit of sex appeal to the event. Obviously, everyone loves being in Vegas. The event is actually coinciding, I believe, with the NFL championships. The championship round, right? So the conference championships, right? So everyone loves being in Vegas during the conference championships. So there's that added layer. But it's Vegas. It's at MGM. It'll also be at at the UFC Apex Center. So it's going to be a star-studded event in the hobby. It's going to be. I've heard it compared to kind of the ESPYs of the hobby, right? So a real facelift to a lot of the more traditional shows that you see. But again, there's going to be things about this that look very familiar. There's going to be, a marketplace on Saturday, which is it'll be like a card show, right? Like, vendors and speakers. Awesome. It'll feel very familiar. And there's going to be things about it that will feel unique and innovative and different. And again, that's really our way of, sort of doing what we say we're going to do, which is we're going to celebrate the past and celebrate, what people love about the industry. We don't want that to change. We just want to also embrace the future of it too, right? So there's going to be a lot that you recognize and a lot that feels very familiar, and some things that we're hoping to integrate that will sort of embrace change as well.
Absolutely. I don't know if you heard of the Collision conference, but the Mint Collective event reminds me a little bit about that, this huge tech and digital marketing multi-day conference where there are well-renowned speakers and network opportunities. And I feel like that's what Mint Collective will also bring to the table, where you can just network with fellow collectors, fellow industry players. And the speakers, like if you look down the list, it's a pretty impressive roster. Can you just list some of those speakers that you've lined up for the 3-day event?
Yeah, and there's more signing up every day. But so far we have Dana White, right, who's the president and founder of UFC.
Yeah.
Obviously, is a massive leader. We got Josh Luber, obviously from Fanatics, will be there. We have Ken Golden will be there. We've got Kevin from PSA, who's a new president of PSA. I mean, honestly, the list of people is really, really strong. And I think most real hobby leaders are either going to be there personally, or they're going to have some sort of involvement in it, or send other people from the company. So yeah, I mean, it'll be sort of a who's who of the industry, but also who's who of kind of sports business. I think that what's really interesting about the hobby, and I've said this a bunch of times, but it really lives at the intersection of a lot of different types of businesses and industries. I mean, I would say, obviously there's the true collecting part of it, right? The hobby part of it. And that's amazing. That's the foundation, the bedrock, right? But then you're also branching to the area of kind of sports speculation, right? So in the sense where, you have, it's being compared now to that third-headed monster to fantasy sports and sports gambling. People are looking at collecting and investing and, sort of collectibles as another way to speculate on sports. And the case I always make is this is kind of the only way to quote unquote speculate on sports, which historically over time has made money. Again, if you speculate on the GOATs, right? You're not, there's a higher probability of making money buying, Michael Jordan holding on for long periods of time than, playing a daily fantasy league or betting on, who's going to win the MVP at the end, of the NFL season that year. But it's also, the other really perhaps most impactful kind of intersection that the hobby is veering off into is in the realm of a legitimate alternative asset, right? Where you bring in these massive pools of capital of, who are looking at this as a legitimate sort of diversified asset to invest in. When I tell you that, I kid you not, there's trillions of dollars on the sidelines that are looking at alternative assets like collectibles. And it's really up to us if we want that, kind of participation from those institutions to kind of make the case for why this deserves to be part of it. And I think what's really awesome is that sports collectibles at the high end have incredible stories to tell and have a long history of performance, both in various market climates, that I think make it a really attractive alternative asset investment. But it's really up to us to create that narrative, to really create that narrative and tell that story. I think that this event will definitely help do that.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty exciting. I only have one question left, but John, do you have anything to ask? I know you were had a question about one thing.
Yeah, Ezra, I'm gonna hit you with the hard-hitting questions. Number one, are you a collector yourself? Who do you PC? And do you currently have a prized possession?
Well, it's funny. Like when you're kind of creating a business, oftentimes you're trying to solve a problem for yourself, right? It's something that So in some ways, Collectable was a brainchild. I mean, of a lot of people, of course, but one person who really stuck out to me was my father. Right? My father's been a collector for a long, long time, but he had 3 kids, and he wasn't independently wealthy, but he had 3 kids, but he loved the hobby, and he always collected the best that he could afford. And a long time ago in the hobby, the prices of things weren't as high as they are now. He owned some incredible stuff, which are now 7 figures plus. Back then they weren't even 7 figures. Right? But now they're 7 figures plus.
Yeah.
And so when the idea of kind of fractionalizing these things came about, and I kind of got his opinion as to whether or not this is something for the that would be valuable for the industry. He was like, oh my, like if your company existed 20 years ago, I would still be an owner of some of the best items in sports, and they would have appreciated dramatically, right? So it was that sort of firsthand experience through my dad that kind of really shaped what we've created with Collectable, is to create something that you can PC whatever you want, maybe not in the exact same form that you're PCing it. So when you look at my PC, my PC is almost all fractional. I mean, at this point, right? So my PC consists of LeBron exquisites and Mantle eighths, Chamberlain, game worn items that are historically rare. So, I collect the best of the best fractionally, but I do it in price points and increments that I can afford. And that really is, I think, the coolest thing about Collectable is your PC can be literally the best that this industry has to offer, right? But you can do it in ways that are affordable to you.
Yeah.
Well said.
Good point. Now, I guess the last question, I believe I saw on the Mint Collective website that you're also going to be speaking at the event. And I think you'll be addressing 2022 predictions in the hobby. I was wondering if you could share with us one or two predictions that you think will happen in 2022, especially with this past year. In January, February, we saw a massive boom, and then it kind of settled down into the summer, and now it's kind of stabilizing. So yeah, I'm curious to see your thoughts on how the hobby is going to be in this coming year.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing I think we can definitely expect, I don't think it's a prediction because it's already occurred, but I think there's one thing we can continue to expect is continued change and evolution in the hobby. There's amazing companies, not just Collectable, but amazing companies that are well capitalized, that have rock star leaders and real entrepreneurs and big backers that are investing aggressively and heavily into the category. So I think you're going to see some of those, the sort of fruits of that labor, continue to play out in 2022. I guess if there are two predictions I'd give to you guys, and I've actually said these a few times recently, but so I'll say them again. One is I think you're going to see not one, but multiple 8-figure confirmed sales in the hobby. Right? I think you're going to see massive sales take place that are going to be real headline worthy. And I also said this, which some people think I'm crazy, but I think I'm going to be right. I don't think it'll be that long until you see a 9-figure sale. I don't think
there we go.
That's crazy.
Not in 2022, but I think you project that a couple of years, and I would not be surprised within the next 5 years you see a sports collectible item sell for $100 million.
Wow, insane.
The other prediction I'd give you, and not necessarily a targeted prediction, but just sort of a kind of a macro forecast, if you will, of where I think the industry is going, is I think you're going to see sort of continued, if this is even a word, right, kind of mainstreamification of the hobby, right? I think you're going to see the hobby and collectibles really kind of take its firm place as truly that third-headed monster to fantasy sports and sports gambling. I think you're going to see it truly take its place as a legitimate alternative asset investing, right? I think, and you're already seeing it. I mean, you have companies like Blackstone, or you have you have Fanatics obviously made a sizable investment. You have Amazon getting to the hobby recently. You have Netflix who's doing a show on Ken, right? I mean, there's lots of the things that are unfolding and occurring that's really kind of positioning the hobby as really cool, right? Like really, really mainstream. I mean, I always go back to just an anecdote. In my previous life, I worked in finance. I worked on Wall Street, and I made a big career change to kind of leave the public financial world to come into collectibles, and that wasn't long ago. That was 2 years ago, essentially, at this point.
Right.
I remember when I used to tell people what I was doing and where I was going, and it was always like it was always met with a little bit of trepidation, a little bit of like, really, like wow,
yeah.
That like no one did, and it wasn't cool, and it wasn't relevant, and it was like kind of closeted, a little closeted. You to be a collector. Sometimes you almost felt like a little bit ashamed of it, right? And now it's the exact opposite, right? Now it's cool and trendy and mainstream and sexy, and oh wow, you work on collectibles, right? It's like that perception has really changed, really changed big time. And I think that's going to continue to kind of solidify itself. I think the hobby is going to become really mainstream in a lot of different ways.
Nice. It's funny you say that because I think we all have some version of that story ourselves. Getting deeper into the hobby space, but yeah, no, Ezra, thanks again for your time. We really appreciate your insight, what you've been sharing about Collectable and what you guys are doing there, and what we can expect from the upcoming Mint Collective event. It's going to be awesome.
Thanks, guys, and you'll be there in person, I understand, right?
We'll do our best.
We'll try. The borders.
We'll do our best.
The borders rules are changing all the time, but we'd love to be there.
Awesome, guys. Well, I hope to see you there in person. But again, thank you for having me on, for the support. And I think it's gonna be a really exciting 2022 for sure.
Great. Thanks, Ezra.
Thank you.
Goodbye.